AI is kind of the next version of that maturity. And so now I lead up Ryan's artificial intelligence efforts. And so one of the biggest things we did from a strategic standpoint related to AI wasn't all the bells and whistles and which use cases are you going after and what's the sexy thing you're doing right now. It was honestly communicating, educating with their company, giving them the right education, giving them a foundational understanding in order for them to rethink about their roles and rethink about how this technology will change their work, because it ultimately will. They are the owners of that subject matter expertise, and they need to be bought into that change, and they need to help co-create and design that change together. Ultimately, I always start from that perspective that our goal at Ryan is to help enable people to have more capabilities, to go do more meaningful work and solve better problems than we maybe get to solve today. And so I really hope that we can use AI or just typical automation to get to do the more fun things we want to do, or the more high value work that maybe our to-do lists are bogging us down to do.
Dan, thank you so much for joining the episode today. I'm excited to learn so much from you. So why don't you first start off with giving a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, fantastic. So my name is Dan Williamson, currently working at Ryan Companies, a national real estate development, builder, designer, real estate management company. I've been at Ryan for about 3 years. Prior to that, I worked at HDR, which is a global A&E firm, and I helped be part of building out their data-driven design team. I come from a background of data and decision-making. I'm a licensed architect, and I have to always kind of qualify building architect nowadays that I'm in the tech space. But I come from a background of building architecture, and I've always been more interested in how computers help us design. And that kind of evolved into a more data-centric career and a more data-focused perspective on the way design can happen. And my interest kind of beyond design landed into Ryan Companies, which is a larger breadth of the building life cycle. And so from development all the way through building operation, the opportunity to interact with that data became super interesting to me. And that's where I've kind of grown in that space. And AI is kind of the next version of that maturity. And so now I lead up Ryan's artificial intelligence efforts.
Fantastic. Okay, well, there's a lot that we could unpack there, but I like to go back to the origin story sometimes. So you said background is more in the architecture space or data side of the architecture space. So did you start as thinking, well, I want to be a technologist, I want to be someone who's close to the technology, or was that something that you grew into over time?
Yeah, I feel like I just landed in the right spot at the right time. I've always, since I was a kid, had an interest in computers and just trying to figure them out and make them do what I wanted to do. Maybe not necessarily from a programming standpoint, but video editing or other sites. I was always tinker. And when I got into college, and get into going for my architecture degree, I had the right professors at the right time that were interested in the same things. And I just gravitated towards those professors. They were interested in computational design is what it's called. And they just, Grasshopper had just landed at that time, which is visual scripting for Rhino. I absolutely adore Rhino as a modeling platform. And it was just the right time at the right place where I could really kind of intersect my interest in computers with my interest in design. And I think my interest in design actually is more about creative problem solving than maybe specifically the design of buildings, although I'm super passionate about that as well.
Yeah.
But I think I learned a lot about creative problem solving, and the computer has kind of always been my companion in that.
Well, and ultimately the tools change over time, right? So
Yes.
I remember early days of Rhino as well. I didn't go into the architecture space, but I was also a tinker. I did video editing and 3D modeling and things like that with no idea where it was going to go. And people thought, well, my family thought, like, just focus, kid. And then we look forward into now that becoming software and UX and design for lots of different industries. I'm curious, as you kind of took those steps into then landing your first jobs, what were some of the roles, or how did you start to adopt that kind of blending of architecture, design, and technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my first job, I really did think I was still going to be a design architect. I thought I was going to use the tools to grow into a design architect role. And I, landed my first job doing the architect kind of grunt architecture work, which is good, learning the throes of what it takes to practice and get that kind of skill set. But I was always the one that was good at Revit and I was good at Rhino, and I was good at making the technology work for people. I also used to teach intro to computers and design when I was in college as well. So I was just good helping others learn how to use the platform. And then I had a really good opportunity for a job at HDR that was kind of a national role to help build out their computational design skills. And that kind of just accelerated my interest in that space. And I knew I was going to be giving up being a design architect, but I still got to play in the design space just kind of in a different way.
Yeah, you still get to stay close to it. And it sounds like you still are close to it, even into your role now.
Hmm.
I'm curious, what does day to day look like for you, especially now that you start to look at AI being brought into the conversation, both from could be computational, from generation of design. What does that look like for you on a day to day basis?
Yeah, I don't think I tell you one day is never the same anymore.
Right.
So everything moves so fast. But my day to day really involves trying to connect with business partners at Ryan as much as possible to learn what their pain points are. So Ryan does a breadth of services related to building. So we're a developer, a builder, a designer, engineers, and like I said, real estate management as well. We don't do all that on all of our projects, but we certainly try to do that as much as we can. And I think that, my day looks like connecting with those leaders and trying to figure out where opportunities are to make enhancements in the way we deliver those services and where opportunities are to transform the business. And so that's taking meetings that involves a lot of education, in all honesty. And I'm a huge believer in educating our business leaders to the extent we can to know how this technology will affect them, right? And so one of the biggest things we did from a strategic standpoint related to AI wasn't all the bells and whistles and which use cases are you going after and what's the sexy thing you're doing right now. It was honestly communicating, educating with their company, talking
Yeah.
about what we're doing, talking about the guardrails that we want to use these tools. We've enabled took a perspective to enable people to use these tools rather than say it's taboo and bad, don't touch. And so giving them the right education, giving them a foundational understanding in order for them to rethink about their roles and rethink about how this technology will change their work, because it ultimately will. But we kind of started there.
You mentioned that every day looks different. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious if every day looks different for you, and yet you're trying to move an entire organization towards this AI future. What are some of the challenges that you come up with when you're talking to your peers or your other leaders inside or outside the org? And what's really the friction of this AI conversation?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to phrase it. So maybe my days have a couple of themes to them, or what I'm doing maybe has a couple different themes. And so there's the learning from the business what is the pain point for them is one type of theme, and that's engaging with them, being a conduit to their questions and their answers, and educating them. But there's also a theme of being aware of the contextual nature of the AI developments, and
Yeah.
that's more of having an industry presence or having an industry ear to what's going on and talking to peers, being involved in the discussion that's happening to the extent I can. And so balancing kind of external facing efforts along with understanding our business. And then also we're growing a team here as well that's able to kind of take those use cases and execute them. And so it's guiding that team on the delivery of some of the use cases that we're going after. And so it's really all about balancing at least those three levers for now. Um, but they take those themes, and every day maybe one or the other a bit more, but it
Sure.
kind of lands in those three buckets.
when when you're introducing these ideas to the rest of the organization, I know in my experience there is this. I'm interested. I'm intrigued. There's a novelty to AI right now where it's kind of like, oh, cool, that's a neat trick, but I don't know how it applies to me. And I've been doing this forever the same way, and it works. If it's not broken, don't fix it kind of mentality. What is it? You talk a lot about education, but how does that play into kind of maybe change or change management? What does it look like for you to navigate this space where at the end of the day, the tools are changing rapidly, but can we keep up with that change?
Yeah. My general perspective is humans have a hard time of keeping up with the rate of change of this, of specifically this technology. The way we've approached it is really to find the right business partners that are willing to work with us to change. Because ultimately, I'm a subject matter expert in the work I do, and am an evangelist for bringing technology to help us solve problems differently. But at the end of the day, the subject matter experts in pre-construction, construction, field supervision, design, they are the owners of that subject matter expertise, and they need
Mm,
to be bought into that change, and they need to help co-create and design that change together. And so I truly look for partners in the business of where to focus those efforts, and they have to be willing to come on that journey. And there are areas in the business where there's been resistance, and that just
mm,
maybe hasn't where we started. That
yeah.
doesn't mean we won't get to that, but we're trying to prioritize the partners that we have at Ryan that are really willing to go on the journey with us and can help and co-vision what the future looks like for their departments, and look at what technology can do to help them. And I think just in general, we always have a whenever I present to leaders or folks at Ryan, I always start with slides that generally show quotes about AI is for people. And
Yeah.
so our
Yeah.
perspective, we're in a people business. Our people are the most important asset we have as a company. I think as an industry, they're the most important people we have, most important asset we have. And ultimately, I always start from that perspective that our goal at Ryan is to help enable people to have more capabilities, to go do more meaningful work, and solve better problems than we maybe get to solve today. And it's about them. And so I always start that we're talking about people, and they need to go along with this change. And change is hard. And I can't just mandate change onto people. They need to come along and be, an evangelist on this journey with me.
I think it's really, really smart because I mean, it's something I think we say here at Crema, right? We're in the business of people. We just happen to design and build apps. And I think that one of the things that's challenging with that, though, is when a new technology comes along, it could be a new tool, or in this case, a really foundational technology shift. There's different things that start to motivate us, I think. And that one is I just see that people are motivated by fear, right? They're going, I'm afraid of it, so I'm going to make the decision to push it away, or I'm afraid of it, and so I'm going to like adopt it faster. Do you see fear as a motivator or a piece of the equation, or do you see other things that are motivating the team as you're talking to them, or as you're communicating the rate of change they're going to have to get comfortable with?
Yeah, fear is definitely a motivator. It's not one that I particularly use
Yeah,
or
right.
like to use, but I know
Yeah,
that part of our team's job is to address people's fears and either level set them or put them in perspective that they can understand. And I don't have a great example to talk to right now, but fear is a motivator to get resources. I
sure.
think
Yeah,
the pressures in the market or the pressures of some overhypeness of the technology, I think helps accelerate the need for us to digitize things faster. Better than anyone that data is the fuel for AI, and data in itself is not necessarily AI, but is the enabler for it. And so we
yeah,
ultimately are using some of the pressures and the fear around AI of not adopting it fast enough to help
right.
push along maybe a digitization journey that we maybe wouldn't have been on at this pace had it not had that fear or that pressure. And so that is helping. That type of fear is helpful. The fear on the job side or the disruption side, I
Mm,
think is going to be different for every industry. For AEC and real estate, I always go back to the fact that we can't find enough people to go on a job site to begin with. We have
right.
a macroeconomics that we can't and have yet to solve. And I don't think that that's going away. I think it's something you'd probably know the statistics better from the guests on your podcast, but something like 5 field workers leave for every 2 that enter the industry.
Right.
How
Yep.
are we going to solve that with a growing population or growing needs for these facilities? Outdating facilities are going to constantly need to be updated. There's a need to fill there. And I always try to talk when I talk with our field folks or people at Ryan in general is we don't have enough people to do the work we want to do anyways. And I always use, this is not just related to field work, I always use this nomenclature with a lot of people as well, is you have a to-do list, and I doubt you get to all the things you want to get on your to-do list.
That's right.
And you
That's right.
probably don't get to the most fun ones you want to do on your to-do list. And so I really hope that we can use AI or just typical automation to get to do
Mhm.
the more fun things we want to do, or the more high value work that maybe our to-do lists are bogging us down to do.
And I think that's a great narrative. You talked earlier about education being a big piece of this change management. It sounds like that's actually kind of core to a little bit who you are, given that you were literally doing it the early days of your career with teaching, right? What's the old adage of like you learn the best by teaching other people something? And I experienced that as well. It's one of the reasons we do the podcast. It's one of the reasons that we have our YouTube channel is because when we put something out to say, here's our point of view, we then have to go, well, what's our point of view? What's our thoughts on this? And I think that it's those activities of education and having someone like you inside the organization that says, I'm going to take the reins of this and go, how might we have a point of view on how this affects you or the team or the organization or the work site or our partners, et cetera. How much of that education piece has been just a way to move boulders out of people's brains of like, hey, this isn't coming for you. We're hoping that it actually helps you. What are the responses to that?
Yeah, I think you nailed it with what our perspective was on the education. Education has been core to who I am, whether it's being a self-learner and trying to pass on what I've been able to learn for others. But I also think the education for folks, and we built a curriculum in partnership with the University of Minnesota to help educate broadly everyone at Ryan with the foundational understanding of what the technology does. And the goal of that strategy was to level set what the technology is to people. They're not going to be data scientists or computer scientists after taking this course, but they're going to understand that, the generative AI, what does that mean? How does that technology work? It's taking text and turning it into numbers, and those tokens go to a brain and kick back tokens, and that gets translated as text back to you. And then those to understand some of the fundamentals is helpful for them to break down the barrier of it's this nebulous thing I don't understand. And I think that understanding is helpful for people to get over that hurdle of what it could mean for them. And then the other part of education is a lot of people, when it's something is new, I've always found that you need to hold their hand. And that might sound bad to an extent for professionals, but I found that in school. I found that in educating anyone, that hold their hand enough till the moment clicks in their head, and then they'll just run wild. And so part of the education piece is we get them inside of, a chat bot with some security grades on top of it, and show them some use cases they hadn't thought about, and try to make it as domain specific to their day to day, to get them to get that moment of, oh, it's not just an email summarizer. It's not just they can start to see, oh, this technology understands language in a really meaningful way. How can I apply that into certain parts of my day to day that make me more efficient or more capable? And so I think it's that hand holding is incredibly necessary. And it also, I think it gives them that one-on-one touch that they feel that they're being taken on this journey together.
Yeah, it removes a little bit of the risk for them, right? So I always, whenever I'm introducing friends or family or a new employee to the technology stacks that we use, there's a lot of I always get this adage wrong, but it's the I do, you watch, you do, I watch, or basically it's the apprentice model where it's like,
Yep.
Hey, I'll show you some things they can do, but if I just keep showing them to you until you get your hands dirty a little bit, you're not going to see this is not scary. It's something that's very reasonable for you to participate in. And oh, by the way, you probably are more intelligent than you think you are about actually using these tools. So let's get in there. You and I might be more apt to be the types of folks that are early adopters to tinker. Like we said, going back to our early days of how we learned. Other folks are going, hey, I'm really good at taking instructions. And so they want to just be said, just tell me how to do it and tell me which box I'm supposed to fill in on the form. Well, now the form's gone. And so we've got to reprogram the way they think about interacting with these tools or participating in the creation process or the management process or the workflow process.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. I think that taking them along with that journey and that change, it makes them feel supported. Or I hope it makes them feel supported, because that's the ultimate goal, is to make them not feel that this technology is coming for them, but they're a participant in leveraging it.
What are I'm just curious, what are some of the use cases that you're seeing early adopters are finding some traction in, going, oh yeah, this works for me today, knowing there'll be lots of use cases. Of course, the promise is that it'll change everything, right? But what are the kind of really obvious first use cases that you're seeing or that people are kind of connecting with early on?
Yeah, sure. I think without talking about overly specific about our use cases, I can take broadly what our strategy has been that I think most people will understand. We look at the way our business is handled. AEC is a lot of unstructured data. It's a ton of unstructured data, unstructured contracts, RFIs, drawings, leases. It kind of goes on and on with this unstructured documentation that we have. And that's where this technology plays really, really well for us. And so our kind of focused efforts are generally around being really good at exploiting that unstructured data, whether that's for efficiency gains or gaining insights we maybe didn't have access to. And honestly, doing some of the non-sexy things, better retrieval of that data. Better retrieval is not a super flashy use case, but it is incredibly powerful for that user that just wants to find the data that they know lives somewhere. And so those are some of the things that we're hyper focused on, because the traditional ML work is really tough for our industry.
Yeah.
And it's really tough because we don't have the repetition that other industries benefit from. I don't have 10,000 projects that Ryan started last year to run a good ML model on to predict the future of those things. There's some aspects on prediction we can do, but being really smart with our unstructured data is a key focus for us. And I think that lands in all parts of Ryan's business, whether that's in, contracts, proposals, drawings. I think it lands in a lot of different places. So that's one thing that we're hyper focused on trying to solve and figure out the best way it works for us.
It's interesting. Early days of the AI conversation were a lot more machine learning focused, right? So that it was a big conversation about having actually really well structured data, really clean data, so that you could do something meaningful with it, right? So you could then algorithmically predict stuff and make automations happen. That was great, but where that narrative has started to shift is exactly what you're talking about, which is I need access to the data in a safe and secure way, in an appropriate way. But once I do, like the models are pretty good at figuring out what's there. And that making sense of unstructured data is, I don't know about you, I'm not a database guy. I'm a designer by trade. So like I take this like huge breath when I hear like, oh, you mean I can get access to the stuff without having to know how to write the SQL query that's going to get me there? So like that, it just changes the narrative for a lot of people that may be overwhelmed by the idea of like, how do I even get to it? How do I find it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that has charted our initial strategy, and this is not something that I came up with, and I'm not necessarily stealing it from, Microsoft, Satya Nadella or Sundar.
Sure.
But it's something that I think the AI community really talks about, which this technology changes our interface with data. It changes the way we interact with it, both consumption and capture of data. And I think that's fundamentally true. And I think that is a guiding direction for some of the use cases we go after. That is something that we try to focus on, is it ultimately should try and make the experience around data better. Because ultimately, I'm sure you're aware of this in your career, of someone needs to retrieve data or they want context about a problem they're trying to solve, and they go call someone up, send them an email. That person in turn calls someone up that can get them permissions to run a report. And then ultimately the initial asker gets all this data that they have to then assemble, aggregate. Maybe they have an analyst that puts it together for them. All that is a lot of time and effort to answer a question. And so I think that ultimately AI can help us make that a simpler experience for people, because people generally, whether we're predicting what an answer should be, which I think we'll get to some point in our industry for some use cases, ultimately people just want faster access to the context to make their decision with.
Yeah. And I think that to your point about change earlier, I think what we're going to have to navigate is how do people understand the shift and how to interact with that experience. Yes. Right. I'm curious, going back to the change conversation, when you're interacting with your teams, what are some of the ways that you found to be effective to start to shift people's, and we talked a little bit about the ride-alongs or the kind of hand-holding. What else has been effective in the way that you have said, hey, change is going to be constant, and even the rate of change is going to be, increased? How have you removed that kind of barrier for being more comfortable with change? Or have you? I mean, is that just a work in progress that we're all still trying to figure out as it happens right now?
I would say probably more the latter. I think it's continually a work in progress. I think there are early adopters and tinkerers in our company and the industry in general, and there are laggards and folks that don't want to jump on board right away. So I think it's an ever evolving effort. Where it's really helped is doing my best and our team's efforts to engage and try to empathize with our business partners as much as possible. And whether that means getting on a job site and having them tell us their problems, but also trying to listen really intently and come at those problems with a different perspective, and trying not to say they're wrong in any way, shape, or form, because I'm not a superintendent.
Right.
I don't know their day-to-day pains. I haven't lived that life. I am continually trying to get on job sites and learn from them and learn what problems they have, and also have them tell the narrative, put little seeds of ideas in their head of, well, if you just had to do it this way, would that be helpful? Try to sow little seeds with them and try to make those seeds percolate, because the best sellers of those type of ideas in domains that I'm not the expert in, if I'm talking to architects and designers, I came from that world, so I have a little bit more deep rooted understanding of that space. But in other ones that are adjacent to design in the AEC industry, I need them to sell those ideas. I need them to be the folks that, if I have our rockstar superintendents going out and selling the use cases we have, that's going to be a huge win. I could care less to
Social
be a part of
proof.
that narrative, but
Yeah.
I hope it's them that are finding the value and really driving that narrative at the end of the day more than I am once those wheels click for them.
Yeah, because honestly, you don't want yourself to become the bottleneck of being able to distribute this, right? Because then it becomes a distribution issue. Whereas we have a couple folks that really bought into it, but then now I need to go train everybody else. What you're talking about sounds to me like, how do you create those ambassadors, those early adopters that will go, oh, I'm in, and I'm going to share this with everybody I know because I'm seeing the best results from it.
Yeah. So what we've actually done, so our curriculum that we partnered with University of Minnesota on was a 3-module type curriculum. And I'm okay to talk about the general lay of the land of that. And
Yeah.
one of it was an hour session that ends up being just a fundamentals of what AI is. Gives them some people semantics to talk about the words, to understand and read an article better when they read it, like what's actually going on in that article.
Kind
To
of
try and give
remove
them
that fog, right?
Yes.
To remove the
Yep.
unknown unknowns. Like, I'm afraid of what I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And then we do a larger hands-on keys. It is an exercise. Get your hands dirty. I have this suspicion that no one takes the time for themselves unless you tell them to do it. And so if I were to give them a enterprise chatbot license and say, go take 90 minutes and tinker, they're not. They have their endless to-do list that they're not going to protect that time. So the intent is that we protect that time for them and instruct them on hands-on keys. And then the third one is, we knew this when we developed the first 2 parts, that we're giving individuals a new tool set and a new language to think about innovation, but we haven't taught them on how to innovate and change. And so the third part is actually designed as a design thinking workshop that is around, how do people now think about change and problem solving? And that is the next tier. We've given you some tools, we gotten you upskilled, but now how do you really think about solving problems? And we have that was the third part of the curriculum that we knew we needed to have.
I love that that's where you went, because design thinking kind of had this peak, right? Where it was everywhere for a little while, and then people got annoyed with the term and the use of the words. But I think that, in my opinion, that design thinking is going to come back into, or some version of it is going to come back into vogue, if you will, because it's absolutely the only thing that will end up mattering. Because if we do not know how to ask the right questions, to empathize with our users and our people, to find the right problems to solve, the constraint is no longer the ability to solve the problem. Right? We'll have the tools that can solve almost any problem. The question will be, what problems need to be solved, and can we actually get to those problems faster, which is really what design thinking was really intended to be about. What are the right problems to solve?
Yeah, I think it gives, the underlying theme of all the training that we're doing is really giving people a common language to speak in our company. And so when we talk about problem solving, if we've educated people on a way to think about solving problems, we're speaking the same language, and we don't have, even if we're not going to do a full design thinking exercise for everything, when we say, I think you need to go empathize with your users a little bit more, or have you empathized with your users, or I think you jumped to prototyping a little too fast, I think you need to better define your problem. We're just speaking the same language then. And I think that's what we're really trying to get at.
I think it's really smart, honestly, and especially as we have to move towards people being more comfortable with solving problems faster, because ultimately that's what change is, right? Then giving them that shared language is really a gift. I think that's really what you're getting at, is it's a gift that says, hey, we're all in this together. We have the best of intent, but the pace is not slowing down.
Yeah.
So we got to say the
same
pace
words. Is not. Yeah. And that's, if we're not speaking the same language, it makes that pace really difficult to solve. And again, I'm not going to say that we have solved it, because I think we're going to continually figure this thing out as an industry and as a company, but we're trying to make the best strides forward we can.
Well, and I think by definition, it doesn't get solved, right? I mean, it gets better. It's like the old adage of progress over perfection, which it sounds like that's what you're moving your team towards.
Yeah, we're trying to. I think so. My wife is a commercial interior designer too, so I live and breathe design in my household, for better or worse.
I want to see your house. I bet it's amazing.
Yes, I actually can't claim much of the design chops. My wife is incredibly talented, so I end up being more of the labor, and that's totally fine.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
I enjoy that part too. I also get to put in my 2 cents every once in a while, but she's incredibly talented. But it's something that I see you know, bringing along people on this journey of change and giving them the education to move at a pace that's necessary,
Mm.
because we need to. There's a push in our industry to solve some problems faster, and if we don't speak the same language, it's really tough to move that needle. You're going to be fighting people rather than fighting problems.
Out of curiosity, what are some of the challenges in the change process? We talk a lot about people. What are some of the technological constraints, at least it's in front of you right now, without getting into details or blaming any particular companies? What are some of the technological constraints where you're like, man, we're so close, but it won't be until we achieve X that we'll actually truly be able to unlock things?
Yeah, I have a hard time picking out that there is a technology that we're currently waiting for to solve our problems. I'm
Okay.
sure there's some as we get more mature in developing some of our products that we're building for ourselves. I think it is more of getting over the nuance of what problems are we solving,
Yeah.
and aligned towards not going after shiny objects, but
Mm.
going after the true problems. I think we get hung up on, and I don't think we're different than any other company, that we get hung up on some shiny objects, and we think that that's going to be the silver bullet. And I think getting over, getting more focus will be super helpful, and we continue to be better at that. In all honesty, we're getting really good at getting focused and solving the right problems. And I think some of the technology hurdles are more on the data focus, data
Yeah.
privacy, data protection, enabling tools. What are the legal terms? And those are not the fun things to have to deal with, but the things we have to make sure we're doing right to protect our data, our clients' data. Some clients have very particular data needs that
Hmm.
cause some infrastructural challenges on our end sometimes, or maybe not challenges, just more resources needed to address those
Yeah.
specific needs. And those can sometimes slow progress because we want to make sure we're doing them right. And then there is just a cultural understanding and education around what it means to use AI tools.
Mm.
AI tools need data to run, and for better or worse, I don't know that all people know that. um,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
and I think that when you have your free AI tool of the month or the week or the day that someone wants to use, that there are some concerns on where is that, having a general understanding of where's that data going. Do I want it to go that way? Do I want to give a person I don't know or an entity I don't know my data?
Yeah.
Do I trust them with it?
Yeah.
Do I need to use this AI capability and that convenience to give up, this level of security? I think I can't remember the individuals that talk about that, but you give up convenience you give up security for convenience, right? You
Yeah.
give up privacy for convenience. And I think that's very true. And just trying to teach people to be very cognizant of that.
Yeah. The convenience of the tools right now, because they're so easily accessible, is a little bit dangerous, right? Because it like you
Mm-hmm.
said, what you don't realize is as you're chatting it, you're training it. And we've had to do, we've taken probably 3 steps forward and 2 steps back in some areas because we've kind of realized, oh, well, we need to really quickly start to think, oh, what are we giving it? Now we've since now learned there are ways you can create walled off gardens and use your own
Yep.
models, but then it kind of gets back into the technical challenge, which now you have to someone knows how to do that and how to set that up and how to maintain that into the DevOps that and everything else. And I think that it's that striking that balance of, well, it's always striking the balance between DevOps, data, and security. And mostly the security end up being the bad guys. And nobody's like, hey, get out of the way so we can move faster. But inevitably they're going, yeah, but. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a little bit of where you talk about the pace of change. Security is going to have to be a group that really learns how to change faster as well, because they're going to have to keep up with this. We can't hold our organization back, but we have to keep it safe while it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a huge challenge. When there'll be, like most things, ever evolving on how to keep pace.
Yeah. I think we've talked about some of the challenges that take place and how to do this well. But what's something as you look ahead, as you think about the future, maybe from a practical standpoint, from a people standpoint, from a tooling standpoint, what's something you're excited about? Whatever the future means for you. The future right now is 24 hours long, but maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's a week or a month or a year out. What's something you're getting excited about that you're getting kind of like, okay,
I'm
all right,
I'm super excited that I hope we are on a journey to eliminate data entry forms. And that sounds so minuscule
Ooh.
and minor, but that is the bane of most people's day, of just entering data into some sort of form or spreadsheet. And I'm not saying that that will entirely go away, but I do think that I would love to see a space where we're spending less time just keying data into fields, because I don't think that's what people went to college for or get a lot of passion at. There may be some, there may
Sure.
be folks that do enjoy that aspect of it, but I do think that that ends up being not as high value work as we could. So I hope that we see, what I'm really excited about is driving some value towards our business, specifically on changing that input side of data. And then I also think on the retrieval side of data, how we can be more nuanced and specific and make that a really pleasurable user experience, not one that involves a lot of hoops and ladders and asking the right keyword or the right search or the right permissions, that we kind of set up a really good ecosystem to make, the business users experience really simple. And this is something that we've been talking about internally is, we really want to simplify our business users' day as much as possible, but that
Mm-hmm.
simplification comes at the expense of complexity elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that complexity generally lands on our technology team, and I think that we just have to be comfortable that we're gonna take on that complexity to solve some of those problems, and that's what we want to do. And so that is a balance of, well, I'm going to make someone efficient with technology. Well, someone still has to manage technology. It's still people, or
Yeah.
something has to manage that technology. And so you're kind of sometimes shifting that efficiency
Yeah.
and that complexity. And so we're just trying to stay focused on what we can do in that area. But yeah, ultimately, the thing I'm most excited about, there's a bunch of other things like the really flashy, I'd love to see our advancement of robotics on job sites. I'd love to see our advancements of reality capture. I think there's a ton of stuff, talk about a whole nother gamut of unstructured data that we're already beginning to explore and see opportunities with. Those are things I'm super, super excited about. I would love to see more reality capture that is super meaningful to superintendents, that is super meaningful to the management and de-risking of projects, that is making job sites incredibly safe. I think
Mm.
I'm just unbelievably excited for the reality capture side of things, but also on the taking away really mundane things like data entry.
Death of data entry and reality capture. And I think that honestly, taking that reality capture one step further, a barrier that we've seen, we haven't done a lot in that space, but a barrier that we've seen, at least in the conversation of that topic, is privacy.
Yes.
And whether it's, specifically privacy around union type labor. And what's interesting is that a lot of the progress in those, like having the ability to capture the work site or the situation, is that people are like, I don't want to be captured, right? I don't want that big brother. But as you move towards an AI that can say, no, we can even show you that we're maybe augmenting your who you are out of the picture, right? So that we can kind of create this sense of an anonymity, but still safety and still progress and still data collection. I think AI is going to unlock a lot of potential ways to kind of merge those two worlds and make sure everybody's happy in the process.
Yeah, I hope so. There will be some learning, right? There will be
Yeah,
some pain that we have to go through. And I think with anything, if you want to be innovative and create real change, you have to be comfortable with pain. And a
of
lot of
course.
people are not comfortable with pain. So we're going to have to go through some pain and grow through what this means for us. But hopefully the outcomes that we're all searching for, whether it's, more certainty in the construction of our projects or our development deals, or more certainty in our safety protocols, and, people coming home safe. I think those are outcomes that people really are wanting. So
Well, it's interesting because at Ryan, you do get an interesting perspective because you get to see both sides of it, both from the development side and from the build side. And so you're motivated by two different things there as well, right? Because maybe if you were just purely a GC, you would say, well, the timeline is what the timeline is. But when you're really looking at, no, the cost structure here is really important. It motivates, again, getting that technology to support that infrastructure. Going back to something you said about the data entry, I recently took one of my kiddos to the doctor's office, and the first person that walks in is the nurse practitioner, or usually it's a nurse, and they're data collecting, right? Just asking you the same survey questions that used to be on a clipboard that you had to fill out. Now they sit there and they fill it out so that it's right into the software, and the software is terrible. Every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, I could redesign that. My wife's a nurse, so she's like,
yeah,
just stop, George. Don't try. But I keep thinking to myself, imagine if you were in that room and that same person was there, they were just having a conversation with you, but like our meeting recorders and whatnot, it's capturing the information, parsing it out to the right form fields in the data. And it's collecting it. And they say, hey, we're just so you know, we're recording this conversation so I can collect what I need. But it just puts it away through a conversation, picks out the nuances, maybe even picks up where it's like, that person wasn't completely telling the full story there. I think there's interesting use cases where we can see it actually makes it more of a human experience. And now I'm just having a conversation rather than I'm filling out a survey. And I think that could happen on the work side as well, where we're doing our daily stand-ups for getting ready to do our safety checks for the day. It's like, okay, well, no, we're capturing all this information to say, yep, everybody agreed to it. We all heard that. This is a particular situation that we need to be aware of because something changed or whatever. But it could be organic rather than someone going, I got to put it down on a clipboard or I got to put it into a computer or an iPad real fast.
Yep. I got to check this list versus it being more human, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I do think that there is an opportunity for the technology to be about the humans. And that's the focus that we have. But I ultimately think that we need to have people in leadership roles to make sure that happens. It's not going to happen by itself. As much as I've had peers or friends or, people think that because I'm in an AI focused role that I am, all pro AI, everything. And it's not to say I'm not for the most part, but there is the part of me that says, for all the fear that you have, an individual might have about AI, if you don't have someone leading up with a perspective that supports your company's vision, you won't be able to address those fears. And so as much as have the optimistic standpoint about a lot of these things, having, a council leadership or something related to this technology that is not going away can help us as an industry combat those fears and make it about what we want. But it's not going to happen if you just don't address it and you don't have, participation in the discourse.
Dan, I think it's really good. I think there's a lot of takeaways for folks that are entering in this space because it can feel like it's all about technology, but going back to what we started around, which is this is about people, right? And people don't like to change. People are maybe resistant to that change and some will adopt it faster and others slower, but ultimately the rate of change is not slowing down. If anything, we maybe can hope for a future where it is a little bit more human even than it is now. Even with the technology, even more in play.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. This is really fun.
Awesome. Well, okay. So I love to kind of roll out the red carpet for you. Where can people learn more about you or what you're thinking about or what we're talking about, or maybe learn about your organization?
Yeah, fantastic. So ryancompanies.com is where our website is. We are a national builder and real estate developer across the United States. You can find out more about me on LinkedIn. That's where either I'm very engaged or, depending on the month, overwhelmed with work. And so I tend to be hit or miss on LinkedIn, but that is a good place to find out what I'm up to and what we're all about. So
awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And honestly, thank you for being so intentional about this really good work. I think that I really appreciate people that are intentional and thoughtful about their work. And that definitely sounds like that's who you are. So thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge. And I appreciate you coming on the show.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, George.
People of Product is brought to you by Crema, a design consultancy that helps forward-thinking leaders discover, understand, and execute on their greatest opportunities. Learn more at crema.us.